Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. We'll get started in just a moment. Some technical difficulties this morning. Facebook is always having fun with how you operate every now and then. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Get started in just a second. Okay. One of those days. Okay, good morning. Welcome to my virtual weekly office hours. This week's mural is actually one from my recent trip to New York City, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But this was actually on the side of one of the buildings, and it's like, this is what you can do. So this was an old brick building in Greenpoint in New York, and next to the East River, and it was actually very interesting as far as how they'd added textures and all that. So as opposed to brick building after brick building, it was actually kind of interesting to see how they had basically beautified that side of the building quite a bit and made it very unique as far as how it compared to all the other buildings around them. So definitely happy to see that. And we'll talk a little bit about New York City just a little bit later. So let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thank you for joining me again this week. This is the 123rd installment of my weekly virtual office hours. So happy Friday. Hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy. We've now reached 858 days since the March 16, 2020 county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. Over 2 years ago, I converted my weekly coffee shop office hours into this weekly live stream address and haven't missed a week since. People still say they really appreciate hearing from their mayor each week, whether it's watching these videos live, joining me live, or watching them delayed, by a few days or sometimes even a few weeks as people go back and take a look. I still enjoy these weekly addresses because, they give me a chance to take stock over the last 2 weeks and provide you some general updates, some news, answer some of your questions, and, provide some general words of encouragement. So thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. Most Fridays, like I am this morning, I also follow up this live stream address with in-person meetings at Being Seen on Murphy Avenue. So, if you want to reserve 15 minutes or 30 minutes, just email me, and we can set up a time slot. I'm usually there from about 9:30 to 11:30 or noon, or sometimes a lot later, depending upon how many people want to meet with the mayor. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. Last Monday, Urban Plates had their grand opening on McKinley. And so we're starting to see a lot of new businesses opening, so I've been there several times already, and, it's great for vegetarians, vegans, pescatarians, and of course, all those carnivores out there. But it's actually really good about listing what their food composition is for those who have allergies and working around those. And they also have, very good prices and some meal programs as far as, you can get part of their club. I think it's 10 for 10. So basically $1 off for 10 meals for the month, but definitely worthwhile trying if you get a chance. And then let's see, last Monday night, County Vector Control ended up spraying parts of Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. This was centered at Ajax and Joshua Way. That's right near Evelyn and Wolf Roads. And it was obviously they found additional mosquitoes that they needed to spray because they ended up spraying this week, but we'll talk about that. And that area was bordered by East Maud and Stewart, Fremont Avenue, just north of Fremont Avenue on the south, Matilda on the west, just basically just east of Matilda, and Lawrence Expressway on the east. Definitely they sprayed again this week, and we'll talk about what those parameters were in a second. And then last Tuesday evening, council met, and we had several things on our agenda, one of which is we received real property transfer tax polling results. And then we provided direction to staff on the next steps for a potential ballot measure. And so right now, $1.10 for every 1,000 is collected for every time there's a deed transfer on property. And right now, 55% of that $1.10, 55 cents of that $1.10 goes to the city and 55 cents goes to the county. And so what we're looking at doing is increasing that, adding an additional property tax of $7.50 on every 1,000 for sales over 3 million. That was what was polled on. And that's, for $7.50 on $1,000 for $3 million, that ends up being about $22,000 for 3 million. And so council, debated that and ultimately came back that we should actually set that floor at 4 million. And so that increasing the floor would mean that on the sale of a $44 million property, there'd be $30,000 in property transfer tax that ballot measure would impose. And so ultimately, it was worries from certain seniors that this would affect, the equity that they have in their home as far as trying to transfer that or sell that and get money for their children. And I totally understand that. And that's one of the reasons why we ended up raising that floor to $4 million. And so ultimately we'll have the final ballot wording coming to us, I think, in our next meeting. Actually, yeah, in the upcoming Tuesday meeting, we'll be reviewing that. And all this has to be finalized before August 10th to go to the county to figure out what's going to be on the ballot. We also reconsidered the name for the new city park at 1 Redwood Place. So that's at the old AMD site. So it's a 6.5 acre park. Ultimately, our previous choice was Shell Mound. We wanted to honor the Ohlonies, and the Ohlonies, the tribe basically didn't like the Shell Mound designation. We'd worked with, multiple people in the community. The Ohlone tribe didn't reply back before that meeting. So we chose Shell Mound, and then when we talked about rescinding that previous decision and coming back, we ended up choosing the name Muwekma because the Muwekma Ohlone were the local tribe. And so far I've heard, they were very happy about that. So it's great to see the Ohlone and being able to honor the Ohlone in our naming of the site. And then of course, it's just a fantastic park. If you haven't been there yet, definitely take a chance and go. Like it how it's intermixed among all the redwoods, and it's good to actually add a park right there next to San Miguel neighborhood. So happy to see that also. And then let's see, on Friday, we'll jump up to Friday. On Friday, I actually took a red eye to New York City, and it's been unofficially announced. I think we're doing a press release later today that I was selected as one of 40 mayors from all over the world to go to this year's Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership class. So this is the 6th class that they've had. So we're Bloomberg Harvard 6, and it was mayors from, 4 mayors from California, so Sacramento, Sunnyvale, Compton, and San Diego, but mayors from all over the US, and I think 12 mayors from around the world. So that goes several from England, Monterrey, Mexico, Gambia, Sarajevo. So lots of different mayors bringing different problems and different solutions that their cities have dealt with. And it was good from that standpoint to meet with it was being in grad school, having the Harvard leadership professors do case studies and talk about what we can do from a city, what we should be doing, and discussing approaches to the different problems that we face. The biggest part of that, being part of that class is, Harvard and Bloomberg are committing to working with the city on innovation, on data. Ultimately, it's not just okay, the mayor goes off and does it. Senior staff are going there for additional training, and then ultimately Bloomberg will be sending staff here to help train, to help work on potential projects. So it's a year-long effort. Meetings, intermediate meetings every month or every other month on Zoom, and then it's being in the city and actually working with the city to try to get things done. And I think one of the good things was meeting mayors from all over the world and talking about what their problems are, and talking, even looking at potential solutions, and sharing that with them. So it was fantastic, fantastic 4 days. So that was Sunday through Wednesday, and then I took a late flight out on Wednesday and got home around 1:30 in the morning yesterday morning. So I'm still a little jet lagged. That was one of the reasons why we're a little slow in getting things going this morning, that and technical difficulties. But it's a great honor for me, for the city, and I think ultimately it will bring some good change to what our city is doing. So more about that later as that rolls out. But definitely it's been an interesting and eye-opening few days on what we can do from a city standpoint, and I think also just access to the leadership in the education at Harvard, and then conceivably funding and some of the programs at Bloomberg. So good for the city, and happy that I was chosen. You get invited to a lot of different things as mayor, applying for this and that, or going to this seminar, and I do think that this was one of the things that could really make a big difference in Sunnyvale. And then last Saturday, I was happy to see that nationally, there's now a nationwide crisis support hotline. So it's open, 24/7, the 988. So it's 988 from your telephone to get access to emotional support whenever you need it. I'm happy that this service has finally gone live. I've been working with lots of different mayors talking about, getting this done, talking to our federal representatives, and finally, this has actually gone live. And I know that especially under COVID, a lot of people have had issues, and I've heard, some very difficult stories, but I'm happy that there is now one number, and one relatively easy number to remember, 988, for people who really need emotional support at any given time of the day or night. So happy that actually finally happened from a national standpoint. And then last weekend, Saturday morning was the vintage antique yard sale at the Historical Society at the Heritage Park Museum. Heard that went fairly well, and a lot of people were happy that was back in person after not having it for several years. And then all weekend long was the Friends of the Sunnyvale Library book sale at the public library. So hopefully you were able to attend and pick up some summer books. Summer's not over. We still got at least another month until summer complete. So hopefully you were able to attend that. And then as far as this week, on Tuesday night, County Vector Control sprayed around Sunnyvale and Santa Clara again. And that was centered this time at Reed and Wolf Road. So a little bit different location. And this was definitely expanded over last week's. So, north it was Maud and Stewart again, but south it was actually, it went as far as Peterson Elementary. On the west, it was actually went all the way to Pastoria, so now west of Matilda. And then on east, it would actually went farther east of Lawrence Expressway. So it actually went into Santa Clara a lot more. So definitely, hopefully this will help reduce West Nile mosquitoes in the community in general, and specifically those that have had or been confirmed to have West Nile virus. So hopefully the overall risk of West Nile virus is reduced in our community. And then last night, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advocacy Commission, they met and had a meeting on the Caltrain grade separation. And the city's been collecting feedback on solutions, and council's given directions on the grade separations at Mary Avenue and Sunnyvale Avenue for a while now. Ultimately, there were lots of different plans several years ago, and we reduced it. There were talks about undergrounding the whole Caltrain tracks, and that would have actually caused us to do eminent domain and other things. It would have also been, I think, on the order of $1.4 billion, if I remember, in order to underground basically the Caltrain tracks. So ultimately, we narrowed it down to two designs for either intersection. One of which, so basically at Sunnyvale and Mary, it's either lowering the whole intersection, so taking the car traffic underneath Caltrain, but then having Evelyn also lowered. So basically, that whole intersection would be lowered at Evelyn and Mary, or there would be basically what's being called a jug handle of the traffic would go under Mary, but then if you wanted to connect up to Evelyn, you would actually have a jug handle that would cut back into Evelyn. So changing the traffic flow there a little bit slightly. And then as far as Sunnyvale Avenue, there were two choices: either bike and ped only going under the Caltrain tracks, or bike and ped in cars. And so last night, because of some quorum issues, they were only able to talk about the Sunnyvale Avenue decision. So ultimately they gave recommendations for Sunnyvale Avenue, which was discussing their recommended decision was basically to make it only bike and ped going under the Sunnyvale, going under the Caltrain tracks, and then make so if cars would have to either take Fair Oaks or they would have to take Matilda. So and then as far as Mary Avenue, there were several recusals for people who live too close to that intersection. Part of the state law, FPPC, requires that if you live too close to where you're making land use decisions, you cannot basically rule on that. So you have to recuse yourself. There were several recusals, but there was also someone who was absent. And so between all that, it looks like they'll be scheduling a second BPAC meeting sometime in the next week or two to basically discuss the Mary Avenue undercrossing. So ultimately, there's lots of feedback that's still going on. From a city standpoint, you can fill out an online survey. And that's open until Sunday, July 31st. And then the final recommendations from BPAC, as well as survey results and all that, come to City Council on August 30th. So if you have input as far as those grade separations are concerned, definitely fill out the online survey, join the council meeting at the end of August. But I've been doing lots of advocacy on getting funding for those projects. VTA has given split some of our Measure B dollars a while ago to I think there's 800 million that's split between Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Palo Alto for those grade separations. That's one of the things that we're moving forward with. So we do have some additional funding. Of course, we don't have enough funding for all of that, but at least that gets us a good of the way, especially, the complexity of Mary and the width of that is going to be one of the more complex grade separations that goes through the Caltrain, that Caltrain has right now. So definitely, make your voice heard as far as that's concerned. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly COVID numbers. COVID numbers across the nation and the world are stabilizing slightly. They're still on an upward trend depending upon where you are, but in general, we've seen things stabilize a little bit locally, and from the state standpoint, the numbers worldwide have rose for the 6th week in a row. But the number of deaths has remained stable, and that rise has not been as dramatic. And of course, earlier this week, President Biden tested positive for COVID. So he is doing well, looking at the latest reports, and definitely, isolating and all of that. From my standpoint, I was in New York this week. I masked wherever I could, and definitely part of going through the Bloomberg Harvard class. One of the important things was everybody was vaccinated. Everyone had a PCR test several days before showing up. Everyone had been boosted, and we did lots of testing while we were there. While we were out, I was on the subway in New York City, and I was shocked that probably only 1 in 20 people were wearing a mask. But I did what was right and have tested, so far testing coming back have been completely negative as far as COVID-19. So keeping our fingers crossed to make sure that it doesn't show up in the next few days. From a national standpoint, we've now passed 89 million and rapidly closing in on 90 million cases. So we went up another 900,000 just in the last week. Nationally, we've had almost 223 million fully vaccinated. That's and about 48% have actually also received a booster. But 83% of those 5 and older have received at least 1 dose. So, and 77% of adults are fully vaccinated. So good to see that from a national standpoint. But we still have people passing away with COVID, another 3,000 in the last week. So that brings our total up to 1,021,000. And as far as California, we passed 9.7 million positive cases. And we continue to see that surge. We've dropped a little bit. So we're back to about 20,000 new cases a day, but that's down from 28,000 a day just a week ago. But that's, we've had 16,000 a day a few weeks ago, and it's way up from where we were a month or two ago, 10,000. So ultimately, lots of people are getting COVID in our community. Ultimately, the hospitalization rates haven't gone up that dramatically. It's trended up slightly, but not in relationship to how many new cases we're seeing on a daily basis. We're still seeing, from a state standpoint, 16% case positivity over the last 8 weeks. It was 15% last week. So it's showing, how many people are testing positive with COVID-19. And then, we've had more than 92,000 fatalities, over another 200 in the last week. And, from a county standpoint, things are looking good. We've now passed over 400,000 cases. So we're at now 402,000 cases. That's up another 6,000 in the last week, but that of course is down from 8,000 a week ago. We've had additional 10 deaths, so we're at 2,355 deaths, and 95% of those 18 and over are fully vaccinated, and more than 68% of those that are eligible for the booster have already received it from a county standpoint. So good news as far as, getting tested, getting vaccinated within our county. I continue to do lots of advocating on our city's behalf, for COVID and other issues. Definitely, if you need to get tested, you can go to sccfreetest.org to find out locations around the county. You can go to covidtest.org, and they will give you locations to where you can get tested. You can order tests online. You can also, of course, lots of the local pharmacies are providing free tests. And if you need to get vaccinated, you can go to sccfreevax.org or vaccines.gov if you need to find a place to get vaccinated, to get your booster, to get your child their shot. So definitely lots of opportunity as far as that. Let's go ahead and get started, get to some of the upcoming events. Next Wednesday at 6 p.m., Mwekma Park, the park at the old AMD campus, will have its grand opening event. And so there will be, some speeches. Some of the Mwekma alumni will be there. There will be poetry by our county poet laureate, and lots of booths sponsored by, Sunnyvale Recreation, the library, the Heritage Park Museum, and of course, the Fun on the Run truck will be there to provide additional games and activities for kids. So hopefully people can join that. And then next Friday, so a week away at 12:30 p.m., the Nature's Ice Cream, so it's a new ice cream shop on Washington Avenue, will be having their grand opening at 12:30. So just after noon, come join that celebration. And then on Sunday, July 31st, Quarter Note Bar and Grill, and that's the bar and grill that's right near Lawrence Expressway in Central, just north of that corner. So kind of the northeast corner of Central Expressway and Central and Lawrence. They will have their 22nd annual benefit for canine search and rescue, and it's always a lot of fun. There's barbecue, there's auction items, there's live music and a car show, but it's the best part of it is to meet all the canines. And so these are residents of the county that have trained their canine to help out when search and rescue efforts are needed, when people are missing. Even some of them are work in water and all that. So, it's very good, but that's all afternoon. I think it's 1 to 6 p.m. on July 31st. So add that to your calendar if you get a chance. And then Tuesday, August 2nd is National Night Out. And so this is National Night Out is it's always the first Tuesday in August. It's where residents get together for block parties, get to know your neighbors. Today is the last day to reach out to your city to see if you want to basically have public safety city council come and visit. I think it's always been good because in the past you have fire trucks, you have the canine officers, motorcycle officers come by, meet the kids. And give out stickers and just meet the residents, hear what their issues are. I think there's a lot of love for our Department of Public Safety in our community, and this is one way to build that interaction, to talk about conceivably issues you might have in your local neighborhood. And it's also just a great way to get together with your neighbors. And I know a lot of people who moved into neighborhoods over the last few years under COVID don't know their neighbors that well. And so this is a great opportunity to build that community that much better. And then as far as council meetings, our next council meeting is next Tuesday, of course. And, we will definitely give feedback on the final ballot measure language, as we talked about before, on the property transfer tax that will be on the November ballot. And then we'll also be considering options to fix some of the appointment process for if a council member position is emptied. And, we had a vacancy earlier this year, and we finally went through that process that had been previously defined. And ultimately, we needed to fix some wording, especially, one of the things that we're looking at doing is removing ranked choice voting. It works well if there's, lots of people voting on several candidates, but when there's actually, more candidates than there are actual people voting, ranked choice voting has some issues, especially as we had it set up. And then we'll also look at, conceivable impasse language and what happens if, in this case, there were several 3-3 ties before before several people changed their voting. So ultimately, I think making sure that we can find a way through that impasse at a certain point. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have a question, please add them to the comments now, and I'll try to get to them. Ravi asked, I noticed on the Sunnyvale webpage that the Lowlanders doesn't have a link for a neighborhood association. Do you know if it's because there isn't one or just because they don't have it on the website? So yeah, thank you, Ravi. I did check. There used to be one. Currently, that neighborhood association is defunct. So if you or your neighbors want to kind of restart that, definitely I can put you in contact with the city. And there's also people that were part of the previous organization that it lost momentum, and that happens sometimes as people move in and out of the area, or a specific neighborhood association ultimately members stop coming. But if you want to start one, definitely this is a great time of the year to do it. Having that first block party, getting your neighbors together, and getting them focused on ultimately coming out and building that momentum as far as having a neighborhood association. So, and ultimately there's a neighborhood associations quarterly meeting where the presidents from each of the neighborhood associations show up and get updates from the city. But I do think that that's an opportunity if you haven't already. Courtney asks, what does the pesticide do to other insects? Do they die too? And because of the manner in which the pesticides are applied and the time of day it's applied, treatment should not really affect beneficial insects. So pollinating insects like bees and butterflies. It's also applied in small droplets, which break down quickly in the environment. So it must hit the mosquitoes while they're in flight to have any real effect. And that's one of the reasons why it's sprayed at night when mosquitoes are most active flying, and when other insects like those bees and butterflies are not being active. So so it shouldn't be affecting our bee and butterfly populations. I heard at least incidentally that it didn't kill any of the flies that were in somebody's trap overnight, but it's been this has been proven for some time now as far as the mosquito abatement treatment. So hopefully that reduces the problem, and we won't have we'll have fewer mosquitoes, especially those with West Nile, in the coming months. Allison asked, San Jose police recently found firearms and other stolen goods at a homeless encampment. There's a large encampment next to Fair Oaks Park. This encampment also backs up to the campuses that houses Rainbow Montessori, as well as the King's Academy. How can the community be assured that the same type of items confiscated at the San Jose encampment are also not at this encampment? So I understand that this issue can be really frustrating for neighbors. The downtown, we basically have the downtown streets team and home first case managers working in that camp, evaluating the unhoused that are there, helping them get counting services as far as that's concerned. The city policy is not to sweep camps. Unlike some other cities around here, it's just moving the problem from one location to another, and getting those services, getting them into transitional housing is one of the best things that can be done, and the county has lots of resources to deal with that. I do encourage you, and I've talked to the chief about this. I do encourage you to call 911 if you see criminal activity, narcotics use, public urination, defecation, vandalism, etc. DPS will respond, and especially if there are safety concerns due to violent or erratic behavior. So we are monitoring this and several other, unhoused sites within the city. We're trying to get them services. We're trying to get them evaluated and conceivably into transitional and hopefully permanent housing. The Santa Clara County has our shelter runs the Hamlin shelter, and ultimately, has lots of resources focused on providing health services and housing to the unhoused. So hopefully, we can get those services, but that is being monitored. I did, check with city staff again this week, and they actually had another meeting with all the stakeholders, I think just yesterday. So definitely trying to work on that problem. Pete asked, what is the plan for Stevens Creek Trail once it reaches Fremont? And so this was something that I talked about last week. Was, we got additional funding, at least as far as the federal funding for next year fiscal year should give us additional funding to complete our portion of the Stevens Creek Trail from Remington Avenue to Fremont Avenue. But beyond Fremont, there's no specific path. As part of the for Cities Citizens Advisory Commission talking about the Stevens Creek Trail. And part of the issue is the trail south of Fremont basically is abuts the property lines for all the neighborhoods. So the people's property basically ends at that, as opposed to right now, there's about 23 acres north of Fremont to Dale Heatherstone. That is public land, whether or not it's owned by the Valley Water, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, but it's accessible, should be accessible to people after the trail, at the Stevens Creek Trail additions are added. So it's actually good from that standpoint. But ultimately, the four cities had recommendations that Bernardo should be evaluated at a future date, whether or not that would be removing parking and creating basically a trail, a bike lane trail experience next to the sound wall, or even conceivably attaching something to that sound wall along that area to go from Fremont Avenue all the way to Homestead Avenue. So we'll see where that goes. Leah asked, is there anything that could be done regarding the current exit at Stevens Creek at Dale Heatherstone? And so, yeah, I have, it's very unsafe and needs a crosswalk or a hawk signal. And yeah, I've talked to several council members in Mountain View. I've talked to the mayor, and they are bringing that up with the city manager, and hopefully that can be added, that change, and it might be already there. I haven't heard back from them this week. It might already be there from improvements to Dale Heatherstone to Remington, which is Mountain View section. So ultimately, it's positive from that standpoint. Vimy asked, what about having a free community shuttle for Sunnyvale like Mountain View? The study issue, we're currently doing a study issue to do that. Peary Parks, so there's a Peary Parks ride program that's there that we're currently ultimately going to have VTA funding for people that are working in Peary Park, but also in the off hours. It would also be a shuttle program for those between ultimately 101 and El Camino, Fair Oaks and Mary. And so it's kind of a trial program, but we're studying from a city standpoint whether or not to ultimately do a bigger citywide shuttle. So we are looking at that as far as that's concerned. Alejandra asked, what should we be doing to prevent mosquitoes and try to prevent, standing water in your community is the biggest thing you can do. If you should, much like, water waste, but talking to Valley Water, talking to other reporting through Valley Water of any water waste, but especially standing water where you see it in your community is one of the things that you can do. That's showing that people are overwatering if we're seeing standing water. And so you can go to valleywater.org. There's telephone numbers there. There's online app you can get on your phone to also report that if you need to. So lots of opportunities as far as that's concerned. I think that's the majority of the questions. Garrick asked, shouldn't the homeless be able to defend themselves as well, though? Or does the Second Amendment only apply to wealthy elite houses? So that's one of the things that we're not looking at from a weapons standpoint. We're not going through those encampments to find guns, to take away guns from any of the homeless. That being said, if they're threatening people with guns or causing problems, definitely that's part of the issues. I think that's all of the comments. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for joining me again this week. These are continuing to be uncertain times. Lots of people are still getting COVID, even the president. And there's continued stress and concern on what the response is going to be, what the issues with inflation and everything else. But, I want you all to know that no matter what challenges we face them together. I'm proud of Sunnyvale and how our residents have really responded over the numerous challenges over the last 2 years. But I'm thankful for everyone who really helps out in our community, showing their kindness, their generosity, their empathy, giving to those in need, building community, much like National Night Out. Your actions and your attitude really do make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together. We will get through this together. Thanks for listening and have a fantastic week. Goodbye.